Jesus told us to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey my commands. For I am with you always. Our primary goals are to evangelize nations of the earth, disciple new believers, plant churches, and continuously share the benefits of the gospel, our passion, transforming lives, have working relationships, growing teams, expanding strategies, advancing church. Do you want to be a part? It's a mission that is possible.
Series. We have now started the child protection series, and children are valuable. Children are important. Children are our future, and it's important for us to protect our kids. It's important for us to be educated and to protect our children and to be aware. And Sister Burgess, she wrote a book on child protection, the law, policy, and procedures, and we want to get the word around. And so last night we had spoke about the incidents, the mind-blowing incidents of this trauma that children around the world. We can't even say it's only Trinidad, and you realize that now, mommy, every day you're hearing a report,
all the time.
You're seeing people who be in charge, and you're hearing a report.
And that is the issue. The issue is that children seem to be a target, especially target of the enemy. And remember, Jesus said, Jesus was very particular about the children.
Yeah.
Because remember when Jesus was there and the parents brought the children to Jesus, the mothers brought the children to Jesus, the disciples didn't want them to come. And Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. Right? And then in Matthew 18:6, Jesus said, if any one of you cause any of these little ones to stumble, it is better a millstone were hung around your neck and you be cast into the midst of the sea. The thing is that Jesus is particularly interested in children. And you know why? Because children are the future. And the enemy knows this. The enemy knows that children are important, and clearly he has targeted children because the statistics around the world concerning the harming of children.
It's flabbergasting.
Yes, and last night we shared some of those statistics, and they're just horrendous.
They're horrendous.
They're horrendous. They are painful. Every time you talk about it, it gets you worked up because we love children. I love children. And children are so innocent. Children are so brilliant. And we saw them on here tonight.
Look how beautiful.
Yes, beautiful little children.
And those are the ages of 2, 3. I think Zachary is about 1, going on 2.
Yes.
3. Ziva is 5 or 6. Jasper is 5. Judah is 8. These children are our future,
yes,
and they are intelligent, and then Sister Jennifer and her whole grandchildren.
Yes, and they have a bright future ahead of them.
Exactly.
And so clearly the enemy targets them to try to destroy them, and hence the reason why we see it important to deal with this series, so that parents would be more and more sensitized. Sometimes we go through life and things are happening around us, but it doesn't affect us directly. So then we feel, okay, you don't really pay attention to it. But this is an area that we must pay attention to because we recognize that it is a strategy of the enemy to destroy our children, to destroy our families. Because when we destroy our children, we destroy their future. We also destroy the family, the generation, and the nation. And therefore, it is very important to pay attention to all of the research that we have, and there's a whole lot of research concerning the issue of child maltreatment and child abuse, violence against children. And there are organizations that specifically focus on the protection of children, like UNICEF and different organizations and so. And it is important that as a church, as churches, as people of God, we need to recognize that children are extremely important in the kingdom. Children are extremely important in the body of Christ. And therefore, we need to ensure that these children are protected. Hence the reason why we are focusing on this child protection series.
Yeah, and it's important for and it's important for parents to be aware. It's important for any relative of a parent to be aware. So tonight we are going to be talking about different types of child abuse that children are facing today. And so we're just going to go. This topic tonight, Mom,
Yes,
is to make people aware.
yeah, aware.
We have to be aware. We
Right.
have to be alert.
And why? Because sometimes you do things and you don't realize the negative impact that it's having. Other times people feel that a child may be hurt and the child cries, and then the child stops crying and the parent feels okay, so she's all right, he or she is all right now. But they don't realize that whatever it is would have had some sort of impact on that child that may be lasting. And hence the reason why we need to know how should we as parents deal with our children. How should we as parents discipline our children? How should we handle them, so that they are not damaged, so that they are not hurt. And so tonight,
you're gonna talk about
the different types.
Okay,
Yes.
Mom. So go ahead and tell us about the types.
Tonight we are going to look at the types of child abuse. Also the signs. How would you know as a parent if your child has been hurt, or if if a child has suffered some form of abuse? And then we will look at the impact, right? So we're looking at the types, the signs or indications, and the impact of child abuse on a child. Now, the term child maltreatment is one of is a term that refers to different types of abuse, right? And there are different types, but there are three main types. And firstly, you have physical abuse. Then you have psychological or emotional abuse. And thirdly, you have sexual abuse. And there is also child neglect, right? Neglect of a child. So neglecting of a child is neglecting your child in any way is also a form of child abuse. And it is one of the aspects of child maltreatment. So when we speak of the term child maltreatment, we are referring to it is a term that includes all types.
All the types of abuse.
Yes.
So that's physical.
Right.
It's sexual,
emotional,
it's emotional,
and neglect.
And it's neglect.
Right. Okay. And it is something that is carried out or caused by a parent or a caregiver or another person in a custodial role.
Okay.
All right. So that's what we mean when we are speaking about child maltreatment. We are saying and we are referring to the different kinds of abuse that are meted out to children by a parent, by a caregiver, or by a person who is in a custodial role of a child. And when we speak about a person being in a custodial role of a child, we are speaking about like a teacher or a coach or a pastor, a Sunday school teacher, someone who has custody of that child, right? Now, there are different kinds, as we said. There are 4 common types of abuse. And let's see if we can start by defining and explaining what these different types of abuse mean. So firstly, let's look at physical abuse. Physical abuse what do we mean when we talk about physical abuse?
So physical abuse has to do, I would think it has to do when the parent or the guardian is beating a child.
Well, that's one example.
So
One form of
you
physical
beat
abuse.
the child, you burn the child, you kick the child, you punch the child,
You bite the child.
you bite the child.
And sometimes, so when we are speaking about physical abuse, we are referring to behaviors that intentionally inflict some kind of harm onto a child. Now, there are some adults that believe that the only way that their child will hear, the only way that their child will listen, is if you do something violent to them, is if you hurt them, right? And because, for example, long ago, we used to hear, or sometimes our parents would tell you, if you wouldn't hear, you will feel, right? So adults or parents tend to feel tend to believe that children will only learn when they feel, when they feel pain, when they feel hurt, when you wring their ears or you pinch them, or you bite them, or you burn. And some people go to extremes, and sometimes there are extreme ways that people deal with their children. Some people kick children, they punch children, they bite. Now that is going to really, really extremes. Also, another example that another way that some people or some parents have used with children is like harmful restraint, like tying the child or chaining up a child. I remember once there was a case that was reported in the newspaper of a child that was chained in a dog kennel.
Yeah.
Now how could you think about that?
Yeah.
Tying a chain, and if that wasn't bad enough, the child was stripped naked and tied in this dog kennel. And when the child was found, there were bites all over the child's body by the dog. Now, who does that to a child? Right? What could a child do that is so bad to deserve that? But that has happened. And then again, you have some people that use weapons or instruments to beat a child. So like last night, when I was giving some examples, when I was looking at the incidents, and I was looking at the incidents of child abuse in different jurisdictions, in one of the jurisdictions that I spoke about, there was a case that was reported about children who were beaten with a shovel. I think that had happened right in our country. There was another one where we saw where a child was tied to a tree and beaten. Then there was another case where the child was beaten with a cutlass. And another one where the grandmother beat the child. She got a wound from the beating, and the grandmother left her there to bleed to death.
I mean, but listen. This...
How can you even consider that? How does that happen? I mean, things like that. It was just horrific, and that child died.
Yeah.
Because when the child was hurt, was wounded from the beating, instead of running to take the child, as if it wasn't bad enough to do that, then you leave the child there to bleed to death. Of course, the grandmother is now in prison, prison with undergoing a jail sentence. So these are the kinds of things
that's a different
refer
kind of
to physical abuse.
Yeah.
Right? Physical abuse. So that's not discipline. That is abuse. Straight case. Raw, hardcore physical abuse of a child. Then there was a case that we had right in Trinidad where a principal flushed 2 boys' head in a toilet. Now that was the extreme. Another extreme. So these are things that define when we talk about physical abuse. These are the kinds of things that we talk about. That's not discipline. That's not physical discipline. That is abuse. When you do these kinds of wicked and evil things, and a lot of these actions of persons in custodial roles over children, a lot of these actions are just downright evil. Meted out against a child. So these are examples of physical abuse. So that physical abuse can result from severe discipline. It can result from severe discipline, like some of the forms that I have told you about, and which includes and which entails beating a child with an inappropriate instrument, or another form of physical abuse is beating a child in an inappropriate part of their body. For example, you don't beat a child on the face, right? Slapping a child in the face, cuffing a child in the face, right? Or beating a child on their head or on their stomach. And we have had cases like that here, right here, where little children, 6 years. There was one with a little girl, I think she was about 5 or 6 years, and she was cuffed in her stomach. She was beaten. All kinds of things were done to that child. So that is a form of physical abuse, beating a child in the wrong place, right? Right? So for example, like disciplining a child, you could give them some strokes in their hand, or probably on the fat part, on their buttocks, which would not think, but to beat a child on the head or the neck or the face or the stomach, that's physical abuse. It's also physical punishment. Physical abuse is also physical punishment that is inappropriate to the age of the child or the physical condition of the child. So a little child, 2 years old, 1 year old, even if you want to discipline that child, you wouldn't beat that child and you wouldn't discipline that child in the same way that you would discipline an older child. All right. So when we are speaking about physical abuse, we are talking about using an inappropriate instrument to discipline a child, beating the child in an inappropriate part of their body, like the head, the face, the stomach, or using, exercising or exerting an inappropriate method or approach of disciplining the child for the age of the child, according to the age of the child, right? Because the age of the child is important. Many abusive parents and caregivers would insist that their actions are simply forms of discipline to make children learn to hear or learn to behave. But there is a big difference between using corporal punishment to discipline a child and physical abuse. Now, corporal punishment is still lawful in our country, right, by parents. So only parents can exercise corporal punishment on their children, and that is our law. Under our law, only parents can exercise corporal punishment, but that corporal punishment must be appropriate to the age of the child. It must be administered with an appropriate instrument, and like a strap, right, or a ruler or something, something that is appropriate, and it must be administered according to it, applied to an appropriate part of the body of the child, but not in places like, places that are vulnerable and easily damaged.
One of the things I remember you saying, so in terms of disciplining of a child, I remember one of the things that you said, it's important as a parent to also explain to the child why you're being disciplined.
Right.
Right? And the mode and the method.
The mode.
This whole discussion now with not beating children completely, do you agree with that in terms of not beating children? Some children would say, well, he hadn't. And when I was small, I used to get licks. But how would you advise the parent who doesn't see anything wrong? They love their child, but the child needs discipline.
Yes.
And they believe in licks.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, as I said,
how do we carry out effective discipline of a child in order to prevent physical abuse?
Right. Now, discipline a child doesn't necessarily mean, it's not equivalent to beating a child.
Okay.
And we tend to feel sometimes that
discipline is licks.
Yes, discipline means licks. But there are several methods of discipline, right? And first of all, when we talk about discipline, as I was just saying, it must be appropriate to the age of the child. So you have to consider the age of your child. When you have a child that is very young, right? You have to look at the age. You cannot discipline a child, or you ought not to be disciplining your child in rage. Because when you're angry about something that the child may have done, you may tend to go extreme, do something extreme. Right.
So therefore you don't
discipline a child in rage. Right? It is better to take time, think it over, think it through, pray about it and ask God for wisdom in dealing with the child.
And also,
sometimes all it takes is talking to the child,
right,
explaining the situations. One of the problems with disciplining children is that sometimes parents do not establish clear boundaries for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about boundaries, I'm talking about letting them know how far they can go, letting them know what is right, what is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Parents have to start by establishing right and wrong, giving their children a sense of right and wrong.
Yes.
And that is what Moses was talking about when he was speaking in Deuteronomy 6.
Yeah.
When he said that you would teach these things, you must teach to your children, teach them when they rise up, teach them when they sit down, teach them when you walk by the way, when you go out, when you come in, and so on. You have got to teach your children and develop in your children a sense of right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You start by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have your children guessing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when parents don't establish clear boundaries for their children, what happens is that the children are not sure about if what they do is going to get mommy or daddy vexed.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get mommy or daddy angry because they don't have a sense of right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of teaching them right and wrong, the importance of teaching them the commandments, and the importance of teaching them the word of God is that it develops within your children what we call a moral compass.
I was now going to say that.
Yes.
So it helps to develop that moral compass in the child.
Yes, in the child.
And so therefore, Mom, it also impacts on what kind of home environment, because then the children can act out based on what they see in the home.
Because children
parents have to be careful if you might. I remember you always said that you would never knew that your parents may have had some kind of argument.
Yes.
Nothing was ever done in front of the child.
Yeah, not in front of the children. Right? So that the environment was a calm, peaceful environment. As far as you concern your parents were never vexed, right? Because you didn't see them argue, you didn't see them fight, you didn't see them cursing, you didn't see them quarreling with each other,
mm-hmm.
right? So that creates a sense of security in your children.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a sense of security in your children. And that also helps to establish boundaries, because you know what? Your boy children will learn how to treat a wife or treat a woman. Your girl children will learn how to treat their husband when they see what you, the parents, do.
And Mom, I just want to say something as a physician to the parents with younger children. Mm-hmm. So you have the children less than 6 months, and the child is crying all the time. And you get frustrated because the child is crying.
Yes, and then it starts stopping.
And it starts. And I think it's important, parents, for you to be aware. I remember when I was in pediatrics and we would have these young mothers and the little baby for the life of me. Now, when a child is irritable, the term that we would use is irritable. Mm-hmm. For the younger child, if your child is crying all the time and this is not the norm, something may be wrong with your child. Is your child in pain? What other symptoms does your child have? Is your child having a fever? Is your child not eating? Is your child vomiting? Mm-hmm. And so it's important for you to understand. And most mothers understand their child. So they know that when baby girl is crying, baby girl might be hungry.
Yes.
But then they will say, but no, she was too fussy because she got the breast, she got the milk, and something is definitely wrong. So for the younger children, parents, you don't beat, you don't pinch. You've got to understand, why is my baby so fussy?
Right.
Why is my baby so irritable? And fussiness and irritable is an important clinical sign that a child may be unwell and that something may be going on with the child. And so if the child is irritable and fussy too much, not being controlled, and I'm talking about the 5 month or the 4 month or the 3 month or the 2 month or 1 month, and even 1 to 28 days, those children, you need to take them to the doctor. You may need to take them to the doctor if it's way out.
Yes.
And obviously, if as a parent, you notice other signs, so the child has a fever, the child is vomiting, the child is not eating, right? So all these kind of things are things that you have to look out for. But I don't believe in pinching and for these little babies.
No.
You learn your child.
Right. And it's a matter of love and care.
Yeah.
And concern for the child,
mm-hmm.
right? So as you say, yes, find out. Well, in fact, take them to the doctor.
Yeah.
Who will examine
for that extreme irritability and that extreme crying.
Because then again,
something could be going on. Right, something could be happening with the child.
That is the child's only way of communicating at that point
in time.
At that
age, yes.
At that
all
age.
Baby can do is cry.
Yeah, all they can do is cry.
Yeah.
So the child might be hungry. So if it's not hungry, it's feeling some pain, something.
Yeah.
And therefore we need to be concerned about that. But I've seen a case where the child, because the child was crying, the mother went to work, left the child with the stepfather or the father. I can't recall if it was the biological father or stepfather, but left the child home with the father. And because the child was crying all the time, he beat the child in the stomach.
Yeah.
And I think that was a case where the child had died, because he was beating that child, beating the child. Now, beating that child will just make the child cry more. So it makes no sense. Beating a little child that is crying, a little baby that cannot talk, that cannot tell you somewhere certain or what is what, and you beat that child, the child will just continue to cry. So that doesn't make sense. So therefore, you've got to find another method to deal with that child. And most times, comfort, providing some form of comfort for that child, hugging the child, rocking them, trying to get them to go off to sleep or something like that, would be much more effective than looking to beat or pinch. Because pinching and beating is going to harm the child and cause pain. So the point of disciplining children, and you asked me how should you discipline children, as I was saying, you should not discipline a child in rage, because rage will make you make wrong decisions. The point about disciplining child is to teach them right from wrong, and it's not to bully a child. It's not about bullying or making a child live in fear. And this is why we have so much bullying among children at schools and teenagers and so on. You know why? Because children who are bullied will bully other children. Because the children, their peers are the only ones that would have any kind of power over. So they would bully their peers. And that is because they are being bullied at home. So parents, discipline a child is not bullying. Right? And trying to force them into doing things and beat them up and so on, that is not discipline. Good? It is physical abuse.
This is an important one. So the warning signs of physical abuse. Yes. What do you look out for?
Right. So how would you, as an adult, know whether a child is being, if you are a physician or if you are a teacher, how would you know? So, what physical signs would you see?
So clinically, I remember when I was in pediatrics, we had a case of a child, and children are smaller than adults. And so any kind of trauma, significant trauma to the child is going to cause serious damage. And we had this little boy was about 6 or 7, and he was rushed into the resuscitation room. And he was brought in dead. In some cases, we talk about children, a patient who comes in and is rushed, and once there's no pulse and CPR was ongoing, brought in dead. We attempted to resuscitate this child for a very long period. We had a period of resuscitation for an hour, and resuscitation of a child in the pediatric emergency is extensive when it comes to the children. The team goes all out. Unfortunately, the child passed away. We then got a history. When we looked at this child, you could have seen that this child had a lot of bruises. So one of the things that the physician will look for, the parent comes and say, oh, my boy is having belly pain. As I examine the child, I'm going to notice certain things. So if I notice marks on the child's skin, bruises, old and new.
Yes.
Right. I may notice that is a sign. I may notice all sorts of marks around the belly. And this particular little boy had marks all over the belly. And the history was that he was a child that was being abused. The relative had beaten him with a stick to the point earlier. And then after, the story was that a few minutes after, the child just collapsed.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And the child was beaten bad. And you could have seen when we examined him from head to toe that this boy is abused. So we looked clinically. So that was a complete traumatic case.
Yes.
All right. And so we examined the child from head to toe. So a child who comes in, we look for the marks. Right?
You look for the marks.
Marks are the first obvious thing a doctor may see.
Right. And you look to see whether they are bite marks or burn marks, right? Or marks from a whip or something like that. So that's a sign, right?
And if it is that, and black eyes and stuff, if it is that you strongly suspect, you are in the presence, swelling of the face, or even an injury to the arm or to the leg.
Right.
So if we suspect there's abuse, we might tell mom we want to do some x-rays. And so if you see x-rays and you realize that the child, number one, so you have to have a high index of suspicion. The child has been coming back and forth. When you look at the x-rays, you see old fractures.
Right.
So all
that's another
fractures,
sign.
and you're wondering, and the story that the parent is giving you is not consistent with the severity of this injury.
That's correct.
You raise it causes a point.
Right, it raises a
and that is
suspicion.
what we did in this child who passed away. We did a full body scan to see what injuries this child had.
Right.
Right. So X-rays will reveal injuries, broken bones, fractures to the ribs, different weird injuries, and the parents trying to. And one thing about the pediatric emergency room now at the Children's Hospital in Eric Williams is that we are heightened. We call and report everything. Single thing to Children Authority.
That's correct. That's correct. It has to be reported.
Because sometimes the very parent who abuse the child bring the child in.
Oh, yes.
And coming to tell you something about the belly hurting and the vomiting with some concocted story.
And try to cover up, right? They try to cover up. So it has to be reported. Every single thing. All the signs, all the everything. And you cannot, you would give your clinical report. But it is the investigators, the Children's Authority and the Child Protection Unit. In fact, the Child Protection Unit is the investigation arm. And they would do investigation into the matter to determine if it was a homicide.
Yeah.
Right?
So an extensive examination is done.
And you have to provide a report for them.
And if we suspect the parent there and then, Child Protection and the police is called.
Yes.
So we keep the parent there.
Yes.
You can't escape. So we will engage you because we have such a question to ask you.
And meanwhile, they send you a report. Yeah. Right? So that because it could be a homicide and therefore there would be consequences for that.
Yes.
Right? And even if it doesn't, it's not, even if the child didn't die, once there are these signs, that must be reported.
So what I want to tell you, and I know that's another point he's going to bring, for those of you who are teachers, for those of you who may be dealing with children, this is what you look out for. You realize that the child is coming and there's always marks about the body. You realize that the child may have a black eye, may have swellings. You realize that the child is looking sad. Those emotional things. So the child is withdrawn. The child is keeping to themselves.
Right.
The child is looking sad. And you have to have a high index of suspicion because there's a lot that a teacher can pick up. There's a lot that a guardian can pick up in children.
And you cannot see that
I don't want to get involved.
That is not my business. It is your business.
It is your business. Once
you are a custodial person, once you are in charge of that person, have custody of that child, you have a responsibility for that child. And if you are finding that these things are happening, it is your business. And therefore, in fact, child abuse is everybody's business. Right? Because children did nothing to deserve that kind of treatment. And therefore, you've got to take necessary action. Right. So those are the physical signs. But as you were saying, there are also psychological signs like depression. Sometimes, this would particularly happen like in older children, like teenagers and so on. Sometimes you find a child is always depressed.
I think even from the time that they are 6, 7.
Right.
Because the child is very alert to what's going on, and the child has so much emotion. So I would say from even when they are 6 or 7, you pick up that that child is not behaving like a normal 7-year-old.
Right, and withdrawn. The child is
very withdrawn.
Or then you may have a child showing some anxiety, anxious, suffering from ADHD, can't settle down, can't sit down.
Well, one of the signs that I think too, now children, especially the younger children, mom, like the 5, 6, 7-year-olds, like when most of them come to the doctor, they might be shy, some might be afraid, but they tend to engage you. From the time that you get comfortable with them, they tend to engage you. And
you have to know how to break the ice.
And break the ice, and the child just gets comfortable. I tend to have, I remember I had a child that came in with the parents, and there was something that was off. This was a bigger child, and I thought that this child could have been more engaging. Just how the child was carrying about herself, just how the child was small, and they come in to give a full story, and I was like, but something is wrong. This is not appropriate for the age of the child. So I'm saying that you also have to
but you have to
be on your P's and Q's.
Yes, you have to be alert, and you have to be aware of the signs. You have to be aware of the signs so that at least you can discern certain things.
Something is wrong.
Yes.
And I'm not going to let this child just leave and just flag.
Yes.
It flags, and we flag the case as a case that we want to be investigated.
Right. So you have those signs, and then you would also have other behavioral signs like aggression.
Yeah.
Sometimes children in school might
aggressive
be
child.
fighting. A child might be always aggressive and always fighting and seem to be angry, right? And that must raise a suspicion that something is going on. Something is going on here. You also have juvenile delinquency, children being apparently delinquent, always getting into trouble, always getting into problems, right? Getting involved in crime, especially older children and so on. Those are signs. The child just not bad, right?
And the child didn't just grow up that way.
And no child was born bad.
Yeah.
You know, you like to say, oh, she bad, or he wild, or this or that or that.
The child wasn't born that way.
The child is too hot and things like that. Those are terms that we use to describe children, and then you just dismiss them. But no, they are signs. Then you have social signs like peer. Some children have difficulty relating to other children. Peer and social relationship problems, right? Learning disabilities. Some children cannot sit still enough to be able to focus on their work and concentrate on your work. That's a sign. That's a condition called ADHD, where the children cannot sit down, attention deficit disorder. The child cannot sit quiet long enough to concentrate and focus on the work, and so it results in low performance, in low educational performance, right? Low academic achievements and so on. It's not that the child is done, right? There is a problem that has to be dealt with, and therefore it must be reported to the appropriate sources, the appropriate authorities. And of course, older children, you see some older children getting involved in alcohol and drug abuse and things like that. So all of those are signs. So children don't usually just get into those things
and behave that way. And what we are trying to encourage you is to be alert and to be aware as the neighbor, as the guardian, as the friend,
as a teacher.
You have to be on your P's and Q's. You are saving a child's life.
Right, and even as a Sunday school teacher, as a pastor, as a youth leader.
You have to be on your P's and Q's, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, and these children are your charges.
Yes.
And therefore you must care about them. So that's
physical. It's a big one.
Yes.
It's a big one.
Yes.
But it's
a very common one.
It's a very common one, but it goes hand in hand with the other types of abuse that we're going to discuss though. So the next one
we have psychological abuse or emotional abuse, which is a second type.
Words.
A second type of
use of words.
Right? And this includes the use of words or attitudes or behaviors toward a child that creates serious psychological or emotional damage. Long ago, we used to have the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can do me no harm. That is a statement that is wrong. We used to hear that a lot. We used to say that a lot when we were younger. I don't care what they say, or I don't care what they do, or whatever. That could do me. Words could do me no harm, but no, that's not so. Words could be very damaging, right? And contrary to this saying, words can result in emotional or psychological abuse to a child, and this can severely damage a child's mental health or social development. So what do we mean when we talk about words? What kind of words are we talking about? Right? Verbal abuse. For example, belittling a child. Telling a child, oh, you will never come to anything good. And that's something that sometimes parents tell children when they're angry, they feel the child is always giving trouble, or you will never come to anything. I heard someone saying that their parents used to tell them they would come to nothing good. And then you have, so that's the constant belittling of children. You don't tell a child that. Shaming a child, right? And last night I was given an example of that too, where this boy was beaten, and it was videotaped, and it was on the news and on Facebook. So at the end of it, the boy was afraid to go to school because he was afraid that his friends would laugh at him and bully him. Then we had a situation here in Trinidad too, where the mother had beaten. Remember, I think she had beaten. That was even when she was beating him with the shovel, and then she videotaped it and they put it on television because she felt that was an appropriate way of disciplining a child. That's not an appropriate way, parent. You don't shame your child. You don't discipline your child and put it up on Facebook and put it back on TV and feel that will be effective. No, that is a form of abuse. humiliating a child, putting the child down in public, putting the child down before his peers, and things like that, right? So all of those are forms of verbal abuse.
Name calling.
Then you have name calling a child stupid.
But this is common in Trinidad and Tobago.
Mm-hmm.
This is a common thing that
Right.
When some parents are upset.
And that's why you don't discipline your child when you're angry.
Yeah.
You calm yourself, cool yourself down. You don't call a child stupid, worthless, fool. You don't ever tell a child he or she's a mistake, or curse the child.
And parents do that. I remember I had a child, but she was a teenager. She was blind, and she came to hospital, and we had to attend to her, and she was scared of needles, and that mother carry on. So the mother carry on. I didn't think that she didn't love her child, but I think it's how they grow up in this kind of environment. The mother carry on. She quarrel. She say, I had to take the mother out of the room, and I say, okay, take it down a notch. Take it down a notch, because you cannot be shouting and belittling this child like this. She's afraid. We will reinforce and do it another way.
Right.
But in some cultures and in some environment, that name calling and that shouting and putting you down is normal. And that's why we have to educate these young mothers that this is not normal.
It is not.
It's not normal behavior.
It's not acceptable.
Even if that is how you grew up.
Exactly. It's not acceptable. It's not
right.
And
they will say, Doc, well, that is how we grew up. And look at me, I get strong. Yes, I was hurt, but I learned to get over it. You know, that's a mentality.
That's
well, if I went through it, she can handle it.
Yes, she could get over it. And they like to say, oh, it's only a child. She will grow out of that. This is why some people are wounded and abused, and the impact of the abuse follows them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And it affects them mentally and all that. So people don't realize that. But so name calling, call them all these names, is a no-no. Negative comparisons. You're just like so and so, or you're just like this, you're just like that.
Don't like your father.
Yes. You don't. Negative comparisons. Frequent yelling and threatening and bullying a child. That's psychological abuse. Or sometimes parents use the silent treatment, what they call the silent treatment, where they ignore the child. Right? So ignoring a child is also a form of psychological abuse. Or rejecting a child is also a form of psychological abuse of children, and it should not be used. And then, of course, you have the extreme punishment, like situations that we were talking about, locking a child in a door kennel, locking a child in a dark room or in a cupboard, or locking a child out of the house in the night, or tying or chaining up a child. Who does that? Why would you want to lock your child outside of the house in the night when there's so much danger out there? That is just abnormal. Evil.
That is evil. That's abnormal. That is just not normal. Normal people don't do those things.
But you know what is another form that is very dangerous, another form of psychological abuse? Subjecting your child to scenes of crime,
sex, violence, abuse of drugs.
Yes.
And well, we know, but mommy, we know this is a lot. I mean, you hear testimonies, when they do documentaries and children speak about how they grew up in homes where their parents may have been drug addicts. And that's what they're seeing, and how the older child had to take care of the younger child, and how they survived, but with all the trauma and all the, and the thing is, it affects the child in adult. I was watching this documentary, and they were doing a breakthrough, and the mother struggled with drug abuse. And so the older child had to raise the others. You see, the older child, when they were doing what you call it now, to get everybody back together, that child hated the mother. She was a grown woman.
Yeah, and that would happen.
She hated the mother, and it was an intervention to try to bring the mother and her 7 girls together. And says, you hurt me in those years of my life.
Right. And that was in the prime years of the child's life. And it was destructive. And
extremely
so
exposing
the child to the abuse, and the result of that, because I've seen show, I always remember this show that I've seen with this little girl whose mother was a drug addict, and the child couldn't go to school for many, many days. She couldn't go to school. She had no food. She wouldn't be able to get.
That was actually a true story
Yes.
from Homeless to Harvard.
Right.
That was one true story
Yes.
from Homeless to
Yes.
Harvard, where she grew up in that poor environment.
In that environment with
Then-
a drug addict
But
mother.
yeah. And I think the mother eventually died, and then the child became homeless, and the struggle in life.
And eventually, however, she was helped. She got help.
Yeah.
And she reached Harvard.
But that's a
but
biggie.
a lot of times that doesn't happen. A lot of times children are destroyed as a result of it. And in fact, they themselves sometimes come up to perpetuate the same thing, the same kind of lifestyle. But you know what? Subjecting a child to like sex scenes and pornography, that is an offense under the Children's Act. And when you come to do the law, we are going to look at that. Because I remember when I was doing that series on child pornography, right?
On radio.
On radio, a parent had called in and asked, what is wrong with showing a child pornography? Yes.
Well, and they were asking also to define it, because TV nowadays is filled with so much.
Well, it's basically filled with a lot of
So
pornography.
the parent was asking if a simple kissing, if that is pornography.
Yes.
Because for some parents, they don't mind their children watching that.
Yes. Yeah. But it does have
It has an effect on the child.
Yeah, because it causes
Because children,
an
it
imprint
can become
on the
addicted to
minds of
certain
the children.
things.
Yes, imprinted on the minds of children. Because I remember I was reading about, when I was doing some more research on it, I came up against this testimony of a young boy who said that he got exposed to pornography from young. And he said that it affected him so much that every time he saw a girl, he would be thinking about having sex with that girl. Right? And then I think he was the same one who said that he ended up getting into voyeurism, being a peeping Tom. Right? And it affected
And that's
him
how we
right
get
in,
rapists. That's how we have rapists in society.
Yes,
ladies
and
gentlemen.
it affected him right into his marriage, and eventually his marriage was broken up.
Yeah.
Because he was just getting worse and worse into porn, more and more porn, and this kind of thing. So it starts with a simple exposure of your child, and you figure that you could just let the child.
Time.
Yes.
And
You could
also
just let the child watch
parents who
TV.
have porn in the house. Especially you have the 7, 8, 9-year-old child who children are curious.
Yes.
So they're gonna see this video that mommy and daddy is watching, and they will put it on.
Yes.
And that is when disaster is gonna start with your child. And that is
So-
when we have the cases, Mom, which I guess you will go into later, when you have children abusing children.
Children abusing.
9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, the older child raping the younger child.
Yeah, because children learn what they live. So what they see, what they're exposed to, that is what they're going to learn. They're going to feel that that's normal. It will have an impact on them and that. So all of these are different forms of psychological abuse. Right? And under our Children's Act, this would be classified, these forms of abuse would be classified as cruelty to children.
Okay.
Cruelty to children involves physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect of children. We have an offense under our act called cruelty to children, right? And there's a penalty for that. We're going to do that when we come to law. Then also depriving a child of love and affection. That's also a form, failure of a parent or caregiver to express love and affection to a child. For example, hugs and kisses. Children need to be hugged. Children need to know that they are loved, girls and boys.
Telling your child I love you is a big deal,
Yes.
parents.
Yeah.
Telling your
And-
child I love you is a big deal.
And little girls and boys need to know, because sometimes parents like to feel, oh, the boy had to be tough. So you're bringing him up tough. So you don't want to make him know that you love him. You don't want to give him a hug. You don't want to give him a kiss.
That's important.
So it is important to their emotional health.
Yeah.
Right? And when children are deprived of love and affection, this causes emotional pain and harm. So it's very important. Then also bullying by adults or bullying by peers
or by siblings.
or siblings. That's all of those
That's a
are
big deal.
emotional forms of emotional abuse. Now, warning signs. What are the warning signs?
Similar warning signs.
Similar signs.
Similar signs.
Low self-esteem, emotional. So there are emotional effects of emotional abuse. Right? So like low self-esteem, a child whose self-esteem is in the ground would be somebody who we call sensitive. You know, sometimes we come across some young people who are very sensitive in that anything anyone says to them, they interpret it in a negative way. Anytime they, you know, anybody just look at them and they interpret it. You know why? Because that child has low self-esteem, and that is a child who would have been wounded, who has a wounded spirit, and would have been emotionally abused. Right? Then you have children who are depressed, anxiety, aggressive behavior, which is similar to what we had for the physical abuse, difficulty with relation. There are some people who have real difficulty with relationships, right? Personality disorders, suicidal thoughts. All of these are emotional signs of emotional abuse. So if your child is depressed or going through or demonstrating any of those signs, it is not normal. You need to seek help for that child. That child needs counseling.
And yes, ladies and gentlemen, children do feel suicidal. We had a patient, 7, 8, 9, I think he was about 8-year-old, who presented with multiple suicide attempts at 8. He was known to all the doctors as a boy. He was already in social work. There was an intense history of abuse. This boy had tried to kill himself multiple times.
Wow.
Right? And so yes, it is real
going on in that child's life. There was abuse. That is an abuse child.
Real.
That is an abuse child. When you say a little child, because children would not normally want to commit suicide.
No.
Right? So that's a sign of abuse, suicidal thoughts. Then behavioral effects. So the suicidal thoughts and attempts, poor educational performance. A child may not performing educationally. Is not necessary. You can't just say, oh, she can't manage, she done so whatever, and you just dismiss it. You need to find out what's happening there.
Yeah.
Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, eating disorders. Some children, you find them, particularly teenagers, they would suffer from anorexia, what we call anorexia or bulimia, where they do not want to eat food because for some kind of, you know, they are wounded psychologically, or when they eat, they bring back up the food and things like that. So those are eating disorders.
Right.
And then you have antisocial behavior, children behaving in an antisocial way, not wanting to mix with others.
They don't have plenty friends.
Right. Abusive behavior, aggressive behavior as well, aggressive delinquent behavior, especially in adolescence. All of these are the behavioral effects of emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I'm saying that when you see these signs demonstrated in children, they are not just doing it for so and there. It's not that you could just dismiss it. Yes, we tend to say, oh, he's just miserable, and then dismiss the child.
And it's not that the child just abnormal and strange.
No.
And you see, these abnormal behaviors, mom, subject the child now to be bullied in school.
Yes.
Because we have a generation of children that are not sensitive and is making joke and laughing and saying this. Again, it speaks, and when you do that parenting seminar, it speaks to how you parent a child. Don't allow your child, raise your child to be kind. Raise your child to be kind.
Yes.
Right? Because when children manifest these kind of behaviors, everybody say, well, look at Sheena, and she's so strange. And the child then comes from being bullied and abused at home to being bullied in school.
And also, sometimes these same children who are bullying other children,
abused,
they themselves are being abused and bullied. And that is how they manifest
so it's a whole cycle of abuse.
It is a cycle of abuse.
Right. So
and therefore there's need for counseling. Yes. There's need for intervention. Then you have the other aspects of child maltreatment, because we looked at physical abuse, we looked at psychological abuse, then there's neglect. And when we talk about child neglect, we are talking about the failure to provide for a child's basic needs. Adequate food. A child has basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Right? And when a parent fails to provide for those things, it is an offense as well under the Children's Act called neglect. Right? It's neglect. And sometimes it's caused by different things. A parent or guardian or caregiver may be physically or mentally unable to care for the child. So the parent might be mentally ill, or physically ill, or financially unable to take care of the child. And for example, the parent themselves may be injured or have a serious injury, they can't work, or depressed, or suffering from anxiety, or having mental illness.
That affects the child.
And yeah, because the child isn't getting his needs met.
Yeah.
So the child not getting proper food, shelter, clothing, not proper medical care.
And this
and yes. So that also a parent might be a drug
addict.
Yeah, a drug addict or addicted to alcohol. And this seriously impairs their judgment and their ability to keep their child safe.
And so that leads you to the signs of neglect.
Right. And how would you know?
When the child is not looking, when the child is unkept, so the child is smelly, the child is looking dirty, the child is always hungry, the child is begging for food, stealing for food, the child is only sleepy. Teachers, guardians, neighbors, family, friends, something is wrong with the child, and we need to be clued in to these signs.
Yeah, so you don't just dismiss these things. You don't
really
ignore them.
Dirty, yeah?
The child comes to school, always hungry, always sleepy.
Something
always
is
putting
wrong.
on their head on the table, things like that, smelly and things like that. It is need for investigation. And this is something else that needs to be reported. Right? It needs to be reported. And arrangements need to be made to help the child. That's the reason why there's the school feeding program. Yeah, there was when we had physical school, there was a school feeding program.
And that always helps.
Many children would go to school without
a lot of
food.
children don't have food.
Yes, a lot of children don't have food.
So do you know, Mom? So the parents, I'm sorry, I can't help it. And when I see these parents on the road selling, I know that's an offense as well, and they have the children with them.
And they have the children helping them to sell. Or when you see them having the children playing something to try to raise money.
So Dr. Burgess, the Lord protects me. I go up to these parents when I see them by the bank. I said, do you know that you're not supposed to have a child here?
And what
I said, what are you doing with your child here in front of Royal Bank? Well, Doc, I don't identify who I am, but I just go and ask. I said, so you are asking for money and you have 2 children here. Why are they here?
Yes.
I have nobody to take care of them. I have no this. I said, that you can get into trouble and you can be reported and you can lose your children. And I don't want to see you here with your child ever again. Bold face. I want to know. And even the children who beg, the teenagers, I said, so why are you begging? Where's your mom? Where's your dad?
Yes.
And it's a real thing in Trinidad. And I will stop
and that is also an offense.
Yes.
To have children begging, to send your child to beg, that's an offense on the Children's Act, which we're going to be looking at too. You don't send your children to beg because you're putting them in harm's way.
To abusers.
Them to abusers.
Abusers will pick up the child.
Yeah, you're exposing them to abusers, to be sexually abused, to be physically abused.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous.
It's dangerous. So I'm saying that we have to be observant and care. You may not be as bold-faced as me, but I tend to inquire just because I'm in the system of it.
Yes.
But and to be able to, and that's why we talk about, we need the social services to help these people, Mom. I think our social services, when I was talking to a social worker, is so jam-ram.
Right. That is the thing.
So these poor people, if you want to help people, we have to incorporate the churches and everything to help these people.
Churches and other non-profit organizations and even businesses
to help these mothers.
Some businesses and so on arrange to help these mothers and to provide help, to provide some kind of assistance.
It's a whole
because really people do have a lot of issues, and especially now in this COVID-19 time.
The issues are more.
The issues have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 situation, pandemic. And there's need for assistance to be provided. All right, so then the next type of child abuse is sexual abuse. And when we talk about sexual activity, there is contact sexual abuse as well as non-contact sexual abuse. So sexual abuse, what do we mean by sexual abuse? It is the engaging or enticing a child to engage in any form of sexual activity, right? Either with or without the child's knowledge or approval. And when we talk about a child A child cannot consent, and we need to recognize that. A child cannot consent to sexual abuse. What do we mean by a child? Under the Children's Act, a child is a person who is 18 years and under. So as long as they are there, even if you may feel that this child consented to be in a relationship with you, once the person is under 18, right? 18 years and under, that is not considered in law, right? And if you get into any sexual activity with that child, that would be considered to be sexual abuse, and you can be held to be liable, found to be liable for that. So it's engaging or enticing a child to engage in any form of sexual activity with or without the child's knowledge or approval. It includes the fondling of the genital area of the child, which would be called sexual touching, or oral sex or vaginal or anal penetration of a child with any body part, with a finger or penis or any other object. It is committed on a minor by an adult or a peer, right? That is another child of the same age. Child sexual abuse, it is important that we recognize that child sexual abuse is not restricted to just physical contact, but it may also include non-contact abuse, such as exposing a child to sexual acts, which is what we are talking about there. So allowing them to watch the TV and watch sex on TV or pornography, that would be called child pornography, which also is an offense under the Children's Act and has serious penalties, very serious penalties. Then also sexual grooming of a child, that is setting up a child to try to entice them to have sex, get into sexual activity, or child prostitution and child pornography. All of these are different forms of child sexual abuse. The definition is very wide, and it's common, right?
And so
now, how would you recognize?
How do we recognize that the child is being abused?
Right. So there are certain physical signs that you would see. For example, the behavior. So there are some children that behave in a seductive way from young, right? For example, they might be playing certain games, certain sexual games, or they may be showing a kind of awareness that is inappropriate to their age. They seem to know a lot about sex, much more than, and it's not appropriate to their age.
Warning, so red flag.
That is a red flag.
That's a red flag.
Yes. Then the child might be doing sexual activities with toys or with other children.
On another child.
So a child who is sexually abused
will imitate and practice.
Will practice. Children learn what they learn.
You see how young you could get abusers.
Yes.
From childhood, the child could become an abuser.
During sex, and then there are some cultural practices that are just downright wrong. That just downright wrong that parents do with their children, and it is sometimes it's just ignorance.
One of the cultural,
out of ignorance, is out of lack of knowledge.
One of the cultural thing is sleeping with a virgin and raping a child to cure HIV. You know?
Yeah.
When we were in community health and we went down into the countries when we were in Jamaica, that was a massive myth, you know. So it was normal. These people think it normal to sleep with these young teenage girls, the preteens, and to get healed, you know.
Right. For them to get healed. Right? Sickness. So they're thinking that they would get rid of the highest level of the HIV and so on, but they don't care that they're passing it on to this young child who is a virgin. And
that is very common even in our Trinidad, in our Caribbean culture.
There are certain cultures, there are certain cultural things that are very destructive, cultural beliefs that are very destructive. And I spoke about some of them last night. Then you have drawing sexually related images. So normally when children are referred to a counselor, that's one of the things they get them to draw. They get them to draw something. And most times the child will draw about its experience. And if a child is drawing sexually related images, then that is a sign that child is being sexually abused. Reverting to younger behavior. For example, some children start bed with wetting. They weren't wetting their bed all the time, and then all of a sudden they start wetting their bed, or they suck in their thumb right? Or they're showing a lot of insecurity. These are signs of sexual abuse. Then depression and withdrawal. All those are signs of physical signs of child sexual abuse. Then you have the child's clothes might be torn or bloody or missing underclothing. Yes, or unexplained sore throats, belly aches, headaches,
medical illnesses,
urinary tract infections.
Preteens.
Yes. Relationships between adults and children which are secretive and exclude others. So they may have a relationship and they don't declare, they don't let their parents know. Right?
No,
and this is one of
most
the
perpetrators threaten the child that if you speak, you will be harmed.
Yes. A lot of times they want children.
They threaten the children, and the children are sworn to secrecy. And you often wonder why a child might be able to hold being abused from the age of 5 straight to 11 or 12 or 13. It's a fear, it's a control. When you hear them come out and they start to testify about how they were under, it's intimidation.
They intimidate them. They intimidate them. Because remember the time when we had a case of I think the child was about 5, and the stepfather, the mother's boyfriend, was baby. The mother would go to work and leave the child with this stepfather, and he would abuse the child. He would abuse the child sexually. He would have the child carrying out or acts of oral sex, and then he would give her snacks. And he would warn the little child when the police, when it was found out and the mother reported it, and the police were questioning the child said that uncle would give her snacks, and uncle told her that if she told anybody anything, something bad would happen to her. You understand? So they threatened them.
When we were training and we did psychiatry, we had a setting with a child psychiatrist, and it was a 5-year-old child, about 4 or 5-year-old child, and the child it was suspected the child was being abused. And so the child would tell us he was, the child had this unexplained kind of way about, as you said. And the child would say, well, uncle will give me a lollipop. The people, you hear the kind of words that they're using.
Yeah.
And he would make me suck the lollipop.
Right.
And when the mother started to cry,
yes,
the little child, oh, no, I'm joking.
Yes.
You see, that kind of, we were shocked with that display.
And how old that child was?
That child was about 5.
You see?
And the child displayed this complete thing when she realized somebody was being hurt.
Yes.
But she described that it was called lollipop, and then she's not supposed to tell anybody about the lollipop.
Right. And that is what happens. And from the time you see a child say it's only a joke, it's not a joke.
It's not a joke. Because, and especially when the child is very much aware that the mommy is being hurt, the child will just pull it back.
Yeah.
So you have to then discern, even when the case goes to court now.
Yeah.
And those things could be.
Discern. You have to be discerning. You have to be aware and know
that child
yes. Or sometimes what children do, especially like an older child, they would tell a story as if they're talking about their friend. So they would say, my friend did so and so happened to my friend.
Yeah,
but the friend is them. Right? So that's a sign of sexual abuse. Then another sign, of course, a clear sign would be sexually transmitted diseases.
Pregnancy.
And
the 13-year-old.
Right. Clear signs of sexual abuse. And then you have behavioral signs. So you have the physical signs, you have the behavioral signs. So in rare cases, children would actually report. Sometimes they do.
Most children don't.
No, but sometimes they do, because
remember
there was a case where the police were educating the children.
Yeah,
they were having a lecture. And then a little child said, but this is what happened to me home. And the child got up and reported it. And the father was charged and the mother was charged for failure to report. For non-reporting, right? So abuse disclosures by children are hardly ever untrue.
Believe the child. A child cannot describe certain graphic scenes just
unless
like
they were
that.
exposed to it.
Believe the child.
Right. Unless they were exposed to it. It is hardly. But what happens is that sometimes the parent or the leader of the organization doesn't want to believe. Why? Because the perpetrator, the pedophile,
is a good person.
The pedophile is a higher person.
It's a reputable person in society.
No, it's in a high position.
He in a high position and he have a reputation as good.
Yes, a purportedly
and
good.
he popular.
a purportedly good reputation.
And nobody
Or
would ever believe that this person could do that.
Right, or he's the leader of an organization, or he's a leader in a church, or he's a pastor, or he's, somebody popular, a Sunday school teacher, or somebody, a school teacher, and things like that. So, and also, as another reason why mothers sometimes don't believe is because the pedophile or the perpetrator
Befriends the
is
mother.
their supporter. Is a financial supporter. They're providing financial support. And then many of these pedophiles groom the mothers.
They groom the mothers.
Right? Groom them by helping them and coming along and pretending to
along.
be friends when they are really going after their children.
children.
So that abuse disclosures by children is important that you recognize that are hardly ever not true, and therefore you need to report it as soon as the child discloses. Do not, what we call buff the child or shut up the child. You go straight and report immediately, regardless of who the man is or woman is. Regardless of who the perpetrator is, you make a report to the Child Protection Unit of the police service in Trinidad and Tobago, and in other jurisdictions. You have the Child Protection Agencies. In Barbados, you have the Child Care Board, and in Jamaica, and all of the Caribbean jurisdictions have a Child Protection Agency, or to the police. You make a report immediately. Right? Sometimes children don't want to be left alone with somebody who was previously someone that the child trusted. And all of a sudden, so for example, if you see the child's behavior towards an adult suddenly change, that's a sign. Right? That's a sign. Right? So therefore, you've got to do something about it.
Do something about it.
Take note. Take note.
So the child grades dropping. The child again is not groomed properly.
Right.
The child is withdrawn. The child is depressed. The child is anxious. The child is not doing well at all. Warning signs.
Warnings.
Teachers,
red flag.
guardians, friends of family, pay attention to that.
And then again, you have the same behavior signs as you had with other things, extreme aggression.
Yes.
Sometimes a child cannot control their bowels.
One of the big ones is what you're gonna say now is they have plenty of money from an unexplained source.
And you don't know where they get any money from.
But the other one is cutting. Anytime teachers, friends, or family, you see a child with scars along the arm, cutting is a sign that children are being abused.
Right.
When I have interviewed some patients and some teens and children, why they cut, the cutting takes away the pain that they are feeling on the inside.
That's what they say.
And so what you find is that usually, so this part of my arm, cutting, the marks that they usually cut on the inner aspect of the wrist come straight down. You will see scars straight up their hand. I have seen you, and you see healed scars, you see new scars. So anytime you see scars here, this child is usually cutting, and they use the razor blades and they cut. And they tend to wear, so you might see them wearing long sleeves for you to cover up.
Yes.
Obviously, when they come to your doctor and we pull up, you see, from the time you see that, you have to sit down and listen a bit more, because something is wrong with this child.
Yeah, so you do just
be observant.
And also, well, of course, abusing other children, abuse other children, be it sexual or physical or otherwise. And then when children sexually abuse other children, it is because they themselves have learned that behavior somewhere, and they themselves are being abused. And sometimes the children are now passing it on to other children. For example, we've had a news report of a 4-year-old child sexually abusing a 5-year-old child in a nursery. Right? And that is because that child is an abused child. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are signs, and that was a detailed discussion of the kinds of signs that you would look for, and signs that would give you an indication that would tell you clearly
something is
wrong. You don't try to investigate it yourself, because what normally happens is that when you try to investigate,
it is big,
because we are not trained.
Yeah.
Right? What you do, you taint the evidence. Because, look, for example, you ask the child, from the time you start asking the child, no, it's not true. No, it's a joke. No, I was talking about my friend.
That is a whole thing for court.
But when you report it, the trained professionals know exactly how to get the information out of these children. And the other thing, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why reporting is necessary is because this child needs to be helped. If you don't stop it, that can be disastrous. And it is that could result in suicide, a child committing suicide, because the child is helpless. Remember, children are defenseless. And when they do not get help, children can become distressed, hopeless, suicidal. The next thing you know, a child commits suicide, and everybody wants to know how come they commit suicide. It's not because the child bad, it's because that child was crying out for help and they were ignored. So parents, teachers, persons who are in charge of children, let us not ignore these signs. They're extremely important, and if we are going to help our children, we need to respond and take definite action to see to it that our children get
it's
help.
Important. I was listening to this testimony. She is now a pastor. She is a writer. She has a very prominent position, and she gave a testimony that she was abused. She said that her mother neglected her. And she said every day she was going to school and nobody recognized until she was in the 9th grade. And this one teacher took interest in her and realized that her grades weren't so well and something was up, right? And that one teacher took interest. And that is how she was able to tell the teacher what was going on in her home.
Right.
Because her mother's boyfriend was abusing her. And she had extensive abuse probably until about 11 and 12. And that is how she got help. And she speaks about the teacher who cared. She said every day she was going to school and nobody realized that she was withdrawn. Nobody realized that she was depressed. Nobody realized. And she grew up to be working in groups with children to help abused children. And that is why just paying attention, just being a little bit more interested.
Right.
Just when you have the play dates and you have somebody trying to raise, but why is this child, observing? It makes a big difference in a child's life. You could save a child's life that way and stuff.
Yes, and therefore that's why it is important that we know we educate ourselves. And that's why we see it necessary to share this important information.
Because it's
relevant. So that you can be educated, so that you can learn, so that you can be aware, and you can help to save the life of a child. Yes? So this is where we are going to stop tonight.
This is a good conversation.
And we have not been able to go into the impact, so we're going to look at the impact tomorrow night, please God, and see what is the result. What kind of impact it has on the life of the children. Yes. So thank you for being on the live with us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I trust that you were helped. I trust that this session was informative to you and that it would change your mindset. It would change your outlook in how you address and how you deal with your children and how you deal with the children who are given into your care, whether you're a teacher or Sunday school teacher or pastor or any sort of leader in charge of children. Yes, it's important that we recognize and that we take decisive action when we see these signs.
And again, let's be kind, let's be interested. Let's not only focus on our kids, but you have the opportunity to minister to other people's kids. Do so.
Yes.
And speak out. And let's pray for our children, because there are some children that go through some things that breaks your heart. And so let's continue to pray. So we are continuing our child protection series for the rest of this week, Mom.
Yes.
And then we're going to have another.
Left, right, left, say we moving on together. Take we instruction from the Savior. Yeah, we taking the gospel around the world, Left, right, left, we moving left, right, round the world. Left, right, left, we marching left, right, taking it round the world. Taking the gospel round and around the world, round and around the world.